Once again guys, welcome back to Fire Emblem Month. Last time, we reviewed Sacred Stones, the last of the Game Boy Advance titles before the series returned to the home console. This was Fire Emblem's return to the home console since Thracia 776. This is Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance, and Radiant Dawn are the 9th and 10th installments of the Fire Emblem series on the Nintendo GameCube and Wii, respectively. Their Fire Emblems returned to the home console since the Super Famicom, and are considered to be the best games in the franchise. Do I feel the same way? Well, for one of the games I do, and the other not so much. And let's get into that right now. Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance takes place in the continent of Tellius. The storyline is all new and unrelated to any other Fire Emblem games in the series. Our story begins with our protagonist Ike, who is the son of Grail, as he has been recruited for a new mercenary company known as the Grail Mercenaries. The company operates within the borders of Crimea, a nation of humans, referred to as Bjorks, that shares its southern border with Gallia, a nation of beast lagoos or humanoids capable of transforming into animals. In the mercenary group, Ike is often mocked on by the veterans like Boyd and Shannon, but he still pushes hard regardless, and proves himself to be a capable fighter. Chapter 4 is where things start to get interesting, as Ike comes across an unconscious woman in the forest who turns out to be the Crimean princess Elincia. Because of this huge day in assault, Grail leads the mercenaries into Gallia. Once they get into Gallia, shit starts to go down, as suddenly Grail is in combat with the most badass motherfucking villain in the series, the Black Knight. Despite his experience in combat, he eventually dies to the Black Knight. Because of these events, Ike is now the leader of the Grail mercenaries and seeks revenge on the Black Knight. These events mark the beginning of a long journey that will take Ike, Elincia, and their companions across the entire continent and back in an effort to stop Dayan and restore Crimea's loyalty to the throne. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn takes place 3 years after the events of Path of Radiance and is divided into 4 parts. Part 1 features Micaiah and the Dawn Brigade's involvement with the liberation of Dayan from Benyon occupation. Part 2 is about the current state of Queen Elincia's 3-year rule over Crimea. After some discontent, the Queen finds herself in a situation in which all of Crimea is in a civil war. Part 3 follows Ike and the Grail mercenaries as they pledge their support to the Laguz Alliance in order to stop Benyon. They also fear that Liron's medallion, which has been radiating in a blue chaos energy, will release the Dark Goddess Ashira, who has at this point turned most of the world into stone. And Part 4 is the finale game. With most of the world turned to stone, Ike and the Grail mercenaries are the only ones who could stop Ashira from destruction from all over the world. The story involving Tellius is by far my favorite in the franchise, mainly because of the sheer scope of their story. Being the largest games in the series, there's so many characters, so many locations to get attached to. With so many locations and characters to get to know, it makes the story more interesting with loads of more character dynamic. The core gameplay elements of both these games haven't changed one bit. However, there were some changes to the games. We'll start with Path of Radiance. For starters, characters will automatically promote once they've reached level 20 without using specific items. Also, like in other games, you can use a Master Seal in order to promote any units immediately in between levels 10 and 20. This was also the first Fire Emblem game to feature a base screen before the battle preparations. Before you start a new chapter, Soren would explain the results of your previous battle. Furthermore, characters can engage in support conversations and the new info conversations, which are character-specific conversations, are rated on a scale of 1 to 3 stars. 1 star denotes a conversation for a story background, 2 stars are hints in an upcoming battle, and 3 stars indicate for a special ability, item, or a playable character. It's neat that they introduced this preparation screen that I personally like. The skill system, which was introduced in Genealogy of the Holy War, has a different mechanic this time around. Each character has a capacity gauge that allows for mastery of skills. By using a skill scroll, the character learns the corresponding skill and a certain amount of slots are taken up in the capacity gauge, usually determined by how useful the skill is. The space of the capacity gauge varies between classes and characters. Any unit can learn any skill, although there are exceptions. Skills vary in how useful they are and what they do. Most give the unit an advantage in battle. Ike's Ether, for example, allows Ike to deal damage as if his opponent has half their real defense, while healing him for half the damage he would deal. However, if you unassign a skill from someone, that skill disappears forever. I love the improvements of the skill system, as you are now limited on what you can learn based on a character's capacity gauge. Bonus experience has also been introduced in Path of Radiance. You gain bonus experience based on certain factors, such as the number of enemies remaining and how many turns it takes for you to complete a chapter. And you can distribute this bonus experience at the base screen in battle preparations. So it's basically a guaranteed level up, though to balance this out, only 3 units get a stat boost, or 4 in the case of Path of Radiance. Another unique feature to Path of Radiance is Fixed Mode. This is an alternative method for unit growth after you've completed the game at least once. In Fixed Mode, units earn experience through a stat increase as well as the standard experience you get in battle. There is a stat experience for each stat, and when you have accumulated enough, that stat will increase during the next level up, and it will reset to 0. Otherwise, it will carry over into the next level. Stat experiences are based on individual growth rates, which can be modified by either items that are equipped or the class of the enemy in which the unit is attacking. I love bonus experience, as you are able to use it to level up your weaker units or your stronger units, and they can destroy the opposition. The weapon forging system, also introduced in this game, allows units to make stronger versions of weapons that can be bought at the shop. To forge a weapon, the player first chooses a base weapon to modify. Choices of base weapon are initially limited, but more options become available as the player progresses through the game. The player can then increase or decrease several statistics of the weapon, such as strength and weight. The further away from the statistics of the base weapon, the higher the cost. Making no changes to the base statistics results in the same price as the base weapon. After statistics are adjusted, the player can choose a new color for the weapon and give it a unique name. These features have no effect on price. I really like forging weapons, as you can get stronger weapons and strategize throughout the progression of the game. Also, giving your weapon a unique name and color is also neat as well. The support system remains the same, in which the conversations affect each unit and statistical boosts are determined. However, this time, instead of the support level increasing based on how many times 2 units are adjacent to each other in a battle, it's now based on how many battles they've been in together. Furthermore, the support conversations take place at the base rather than on the battlefield. An option to reread the support conversations was available in this game, unlike all the others in the Fire Emblem series at this point. However, there is a section on the unit information screen that shows the specific statistical gains from support conversations. This wasn't available in the previous Fire Emblem games. This new and improved support system is one that I feel is better than the previous Fire Emblem games. Since they're on home consoles, the support conversations can be longer and more engaging for the gamer with great character development in these supports. The best example of this, in my opinion, is the conversation between Ike and Soren, where Soren reveals that he is a Branded, which is a combination of a Bjork and a Laguz, and Ike, being the respectable man that he is, respects Soren for who he is, not what he is. Radiant Dawn still retains most of the mechanics from Path of Radiance with some slight changes. The most notable change in Radiant Dawn is the game's structure. The game's 45 chapters are unequally divided into 4 parts. Each chapter features a leader character comparable to the lore characters in previous games. This definitely makes sense since it is branching multiple armies into one giant conflict, and it works really well. And while I do want to mention this game also has supports, I really don't want to talk about it because the supports in this game are awful, and I'll get to them later. Radiant Dawn also introduced a new branching promotion, 3rd tier units. In previous Fire Emblem games, you've only had 2 tiers of units. The first tier, which were the basic classes, and the second tier, which were the promoted advanced classes, like from a knight to a general. 3rd tier units are the strongest in the entire game, and their ultimate skill is learned upon promotion. There are 2 ways to promote a 2nd tier unit to a 3rd tier unit. Either level up to level 21 as the 2nd tier unit, or use a Master Crown in between levels 10 and 20 for a 2nd tier unit. I really love 3rd tier units. They are ungodly strong against the opposition and just destroy any type of enemy. Now this better return in Fire Emblem Switch or I'm gonna have to smack a bitch. Maybe I'll smack Meg, she deserves it the most. I could talk about the weapons as well, but they're mostly similar than in Path of Radiance, so I'm gonna ignore talking about that. All that's left to talk about is terrain and elevation. The height of the terrain now affects the gameplay. If you are higher in elevation to the enemy, you can deal more damage as well as more accuracy. Though if you're lower than your enemy, the opposite happens and you have much lower attack and accuracy. However, only units that have ranged weapons like bows and tomes can attack from a higher or lower plane. While most units can climb up ledges, paladins will have to use the stairs and ramps in order to get to higher elevation. So yeah, I really like these boosts to terrain, as getting on higher ground gives you more damage and more accuracy. Oh boy, that was a lot of information to swallow. So for the most part, both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn have really strong features and mechanics that have been introduced and tweaked for the better. As for the characters, Path of Radiance has some amazing characters. Arguably, it has the best roster in the franchise. They stand out, they're unique, they're funny, they're layered, it's a quality ensemble here. All the characters are either really interesting or reliable units on the battlefield, which makes Path of Radiance one of my favorite casts in the series because they have no griping flaws in their roster. Though most of the characters that return from Path of Radiance in Radiant Dawn, they are pretty lackluster. As for the new characters, they're okay but not amazing, with the exception of Edward, Nolan, Raphael, Knigas, and Ranulf. Those guys are awesome. Not to mention these two games having some of my favorite villains in the franchise. Those being King Ashnard and the Black Knight. For not being just intimidating, but also freaking badass. Also, gotta mention the soundtracks of these games. Both of these games have rather energetic and epic soundtracks at points. Which one is stronger? It's a close call, but I gotta say Path of Radiance. So what do I not like about these games? Let's find out. The first problem I have with these games are the cutscenes. Both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn show full motion video to present cinematic sequences at key points in the game, as well as having voice acting. Now the cutscenes themselves look very appealing, but in the sound department, well...
Ah, you're up. About time.
So that I might see you at your full strength.
Sorry. Always lost in your book. What do I say about watching your back?
If I had to compare these cutscenes to another game, it'd have to be Sonic Adventure 2 on the GameCube. And we all know how those went, right?
Hey, that's... That blue hedgehog again, of all places.
I found you, Faker.
Faker? I think you're the fake hedgehog around here. You're comparing yourself to me? Huh? You're not even good enough to be
I'll
my...
make you eat those words.
So yeah, the cutscenes are visually appealing, but awkward in terms of the sound department. Now that I've mentioned about the cutscenes graphically, I might as well talk about the in-game graphics and how they look on the battlefield. For Path of Radiance, it's actually really good for GameCube standards. And for Radiant Dawn on the Wii, it looks pretty good as well. Now, level design is an entirely different story. In Path of Radiance, it's not that bad. However, Path of Radiance did introduce really stupid gimmicks like in Chapter 17, Chapter 23, and Chapter 25. In the case of Radiant Dawn, since the maps are so large, the enemies are everywhere, and they also introduce really stupid gimmicks that I'm glad they haven't done up to this point. However, the most infamous part of Radiant Dawn's level design is its difficulty. This fucking game, is by far the hardest in the entire franchise. When you combine the difficulty of the AI and in the level design, as well as how large the maps are with the stupid gimmicks, the chapters in Radiant Dawn become tedious, boring, and outright frustrating at times, and it gets all over your face. Another problem that relates to the difficulty is that you play within 3 armies and have to switch in between. Now to be fair, Ike and the Grail Mercenaries are the strongest army in the game, and you should have no problem with them. Not to mention that the Dawn Brigades are obviously weaker than the Grail Mercenaries. Especially in Part 3 when you play as the Mercenaries in Chapter 5, and then you have to go straight to the Dawn Brigades in Chapter 6, and their levels are shit compared to the enemy. And before I reach my final verdict, I have to get this nitpick out of the way. It is Ike's portrayal in Radiant Dawn. No, I don't hate Ike in Radiant Dawn. In fact, the game does a very good job of showing Ike's growth as a leader. But with all that, I still like Ike's personality better in Path of Radiance. Ike's overall personality is that he is a very kind and brave person, never backing down from a fight and always doing what he feels is right. In this case, he fights for his friends. But what I really like about Ike in Path of Radiance is that he has no personal bias towards anyone he meets. Ike has no hatred for the Lagoos and accepts people for who they are, not what they are. All of this makes Ike a more relatable character, as you can really engage with him compared to other lords in the franchise. Though in Radiant Dawn, Ike seems to have a condition known as perfect character syndrome, as Ike seems to be the one that resolves everything and can do no wrong. This whole Ike is perfect deal really bugs me, but I still find Ike to be a great character in both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Based on my own personal experience, Path of Radiance is one of the best games in the series technically, as well as one of my favorites in the series. The story, characters, level design, support conversations, and the soundtrack are all fantastic, and it all really blends in naturally, and it's an overall enjoyable time. While I don't like Radiant Dawn as much as Path of Radiance, I still enjoyed the game. The continuation of the overall story, the gameplay mechanics, the soundtrack, and all that really makes this game one of a kind, despite it being the hardest game in the franchise. While I did find Radiant Dawn to be the hardest game in the series, and that the levels can be rather long, tedious, and exhausting, I still enjoyed the game, so consider Radiant Dawn a guilty pleasure. Please don't get mad at me, fanbase. Anyway, that's it for Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Sorry this one took so long, but clearly this game has been giving my attention recently. So I'll get back to making Fire Emblem reviews soon enough. And next time is a return to the handheld Fire Emblem experience, but this time on the DS.